What's going on, y'all? How's your guys' day going? Hope you're having a good day. Today's good. Thank you for asking. I'm going to talk about forgiveness. And I've spoken about this not too many times, but at least I want to say twice. And so if that's not your type of flavor, this video might not be for you. But what makes this one different is the mentality as to what it is we think. And not only that, but the action behind the mentality. Now, obviously, if you have heard what I think about forgiveness, or really anybody in general, right? The general consensus, I would say, about forgiveness is that it's necessary. And it's not easy. It's not convincing. It's not popular. But despite that, I think that's what makes it so powerful. I think that's what quite literally proves that it is the correct step. It is the correct direction that you take. And a large reason why I think that is because we've tried everything else. At least I would think so, right? Like you look on social media, you look out in the world today and you see things, for the way that they are. And we typically ask ourselves, how is it that we got here? And, I wouldn't be surprised if the answer was, well, we've tried everything except for, I guess, looking inward in a real way, right? And not only that, but if I had to liken it to something, I would say forgiveness is very similar to the way in which swords are made, or even diamonds. And in a very poetic way, it takes a very precise and very delicate craft to create something so dangerous, right? Like, again, using the sword as an example. When you make a sword, you have to hammer out all of the impurities. That's probably the longest, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but that is the longest aspect of making a sword. You put it in the lava or whatever it's called, the molten stuff. I forget what it's called. I think it's lava. I don't know. It looks like lava. Regardless, you put it in that stuff, right? And it hardens it. But then the key aspect, the most important aspect, is when you take that hammer and you strike it and you shape it into what it is. And so you could liken human beings to the impurities of the sword and forgiveness as the hammer. And the funniest part about it is forgiveness is not going to hit softly, right? The same way a hammer is not going to hit steel softly. You got to really hammer it in there. But guess what? The outcome is the result of purification. You're purifying the impurities and you're creating it what it ought to be. And it ends up being a very dangerous thing. And in a lot of ways, you could argue that forgiveness is dangerous. I wouldn't say dangerous like in the most literal sense, but dangerous in the sense of, or perspective of, like, the effectiveness, the power that it holds. And I think that society truly has like they've tricked themselves. We quite literally have convinced ourselves into believing that forgiveness is for fools. But we do it specifically so that we can have a lack of responsibility, so that we don't have to be eye to eye to our issues, because it always ends up being a result of our own problems, like internally, right? The inner me is the enemy. And so anyways, the mentality that I wanted to propose is, I believe that it's common. It's been spoken of before. And it's basically just a phrase which goes, love those who don't deserve it, because those are the people who need it the most. They're the ones who are in need of the most amount of help, are the people who don't deserve it. And, obviously, the common answer, the first thing that you think of is, why do they deserve it? Why should we? What's the point? And you're fair to think that, right? That's a personal gripe I have about the topic of forgiveness, is that people try to poise it as if it's all just supposed to be happy. It's all supposed to be passive, or it's all supposed to be this easygoing, lackadaisical thing. And earlier, I made the example of the hammer and the sword, and that's definitely not easy. That's definitely not, something you would consider soft or something, right? I guess just, it's something that takes effort, but a very, almost like tough love in a way, right? Like it almost sounds like an oxymoron, but when you really think about it, that is the truest form of love. That is the truest form of forgiveness, is loving them despite who they are. And you want to know what the funniest part is that they are the way they are because they weren't capable of loving themselves, which is why it's so important that we love them. We love them not only because, for our own sake, but for them, right? Like we take on their burden. That's what love is. That's what forgiveness is. You take on the burden of another person and you tell them, it's okay. We're going to get past this. And people don't like to hear that. And I've made a video about this, right? It was talking about how punishment is infinitely more convincing because of the results, because of how quick it is, right? It's right in your face. You immediately see the result. You immediately understand the justification, or, I guess the consequences are in your face immediately. And there's nothing more that people love than immediacy. But I don't want to repeat too many aspects of that video because that's a little bit more specific. This one, it's very similar to that video. But again, this one is supposed to be about how the mentality of loving another person that doesn't deserve it is a form of action. And that's what the main focus of this video is that forgiveness is action, right? Again, there is this very weird, odd narrative that has been spread that forgiveness is a passive thing, that it's almost like a form of protection, right? But it's quite the opposite. It's an offense. You're quite literally changing things. And if anything, being violent would be the complete opposite of that. You would be keeping things the same. You would be repeating cycles. You would be causing the issues. You would be the symptom. You would be the reason why, or the causation rather. You would be the same exact problem, right? And don't get me wrong, man, it's hard, right? Like it's hard trying not to get angry when a person is angry at you, or yell when somebody's yelling at you. And so I guess the best analogy that I could think of would be like if you have a rock, right? And let's say this rock is like really corroded, really, really hard, right? And you're hammering it away with a pickaxe. Now, that rock took a long time to get to that point, which means it would take you an infinitely longer amount of time to break it down with that pickaxe. And so in the same way, you have to be able to take the time, but the way in which you go about that is equally as important. And you want to know what the best solution is a soft approach. And you want to know what breaks down rocks better than anything? Water, right? Go look up any erosion video, like it's 6th grade again, right? Where they used to show you the effects of erosion, right? Water always breaks it down. But again, the key being time. It takes time. And that's the part that people hate the most, which I totally get, right? Nobody wants to have to take the time. But man, you have to understand that it took even longer for that person to become that way, for that person to end up that way. Like they didn't just become that way for no reason, right? Those are probably years and years of who knows what, of just experiences. And so it's so important that you understand that you are more than likely going to be the only embodiment of forgiveness that they ever experience. And I don't just mean that in a literal way where you'll be the only person that forgives them or shows them forgiveness, but more so the idea that you'll be the only thought, or rather you would be the only experience at all, like in any way. Like they more than likely have not seen anyone been forgiven, or rather they've never seen forgiveness as an action, like actually being acted out, right? They've probably heard of it, they've probably thought about it, whatever, like people talking about it, but to actually see it though is a completely different thing, because again, for whatever reason, it's this weird passive thing that is just spoken about, like as if it only exists in words instead of physical, right? And you want to know what the funniest part is too, is that people who are that way, right? People who are very jaded, people who are very corroded in that way, they, obviously, like how they always say, they see or they learn things through action. And so that's why violence, or I guess aggressiveness, is so powerful to them, because it's an immediate consequence, it's an immediate result. And so in the same way, you over time are going to be the exact same thing. You're going to be the one to show them the results of what it is you're talking about, of what it is you're embodying, right? It's very similar to the phrase, if you've ever heard, for Christians, they say that it's very important that you read your Bible, because if you go talk to people and they don't know anything about the Bible, you're going to be the only version of the Bible they ever know. And so that's why it's so important to be prepared. So in the same way, when you're trying to be somebody, when you're trying to forgive, when you're trying to be active, in that way in somebody's life, you have to be prepared. But you know how they always say, communication is key, communication is key. You want to know what the full quote of that is? Communication is key, but so is a sense of understanding. And I don't know why that's not the more popular version of that quote, because that is the full quote. But anyways, it takes both, right? You can't do one without the other. And so you have to understand that, yeah, they're going to butt heads with you. Yeah, they're going to make it hard. Yeah, they're not going to understand. And that it's going to take time. And that, you might feel like you're doing like nothing, like you're not making any progress. But man, you never know, right? You really never know. And I'm not saying to just try forever and to force people into things, but it's far more important that you become that person regardless of them. And the reason why I say that is because you're not trying to teach them a lesson, or you're not walking away from them to teach them a lesson. You're walking away because you learned yours. You learned your lesson. That's why you are the way you are. And so you show them indirectly just by being that person in I guess just the most general sense, like just the embodiment, right? And so as you carry yourself, right, that'll obviously start to reflect and it'll start to glow throughout you. And I struggle with it too, man. It's not easy. Like my biggest issue is being very critical of people online, right? I just see ridiculous people, man. Just people being ridiculous, saying ridiculous things, making things harder for people, whatever it might be. And I become very critical. I become very judgmental of the people I see online, just because of how confident they are to release these things. And it's ironic because somebody could totally feel that way about me. And I wish that there was more action I could do, right? Like it really does bother me that I talk about these things, but I can't necessarily do anything. And don't get me wrong, I love talking about it, but it's just, it's difficult. But yeah, no, it's, if you're thinking of somebody specific, by the way, that's more than likely like for a reason, right? You should probably talk to that person if you're thinking about someone, when you're hearing this topic, I guess, or if you more than often not think of somebody, yeah, that's your subconscious telling you, that's who you think of. And so, because I haven't mentioned anybody specific, right? Like it could be anything. It could be, like how I said, people online. It could be just friends, family, whoever it might be. Because, I'm sure you see it all the time where people are just so quick to cut people off now. And don't get me wrong, that's a beautiful thing, because that wasn't a thing back then, right? Like not that long ago. That wasn't popular to do. That wasn't easy to do. You couldn't just cut people off like that. And now that we can, I feel like we've kind of taken it to the max. We've taken it a little bit too far. And not only that, but like I said earlier, right? I don't need to repeat myself too much, but we got to drill it into our heads that forgiveness is as much of an action as violence is. that it is a reaction. It is a response. It is something that moves forward. It's like the turtle and the rabbit or whatever. I forget what that child story is called. Like that, the technical name. Like the rabbit isn't called the rabbit, I don't think. But anyways, it's like, sometimes, man, it really does take that long. And I've had times like that, right? Like, I'm not just talking about this just out of my mind or like just, what I think. I've had plenty of personal experiences where I've had to tell people, I'm not going to have this conversation with you, not because I don't want to, but because I love you too much to allow this to continue, right? Like, I love you so much that I don't want to see this continuing to happen. And so if that means I have to walk away, then so be it, right? Because that I'm willing to let go, knowing that that'll be what causes change, that'll be what, if that has to be the answer, right? Because sometimes that really does have to be the answer, is showing what you're willing to do and what you're willing to not do, right? They always say actions speak louder than words, but then when it comes to the topic of forgiveness, we don't think that way. So that's all this video was about. But I think I made my point. If you enjoyed this video, thank you for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day.